Hey, so this is going to be the second and the final part of the final conversation in my school experience, which is a series of conversations with me and my friend Steven about Cracks in the Ivory Tower, The Moral Mess of Higher Education. This is a book by Jason Brennan and Phillip Magness, and it focuses on the issues and just analyzing and talking about the issues going on in the higher education system, primarily in the United States of America. And Stephen and I have been having this conversation by breaking it down. Every single chapter we go through and we focus on it. He reads it and then he comes and he tells me about it, and then we kind of have a back and forth with it. And that's how it goes. There's another part where I discuss in particular the seven big economic insights, and then normative business ethic questions and descriptive business ethic questions that the authors themselves use in the book to kind of inform you how you're going to approach, how they're approaching the content. And I think if you haven't listened to any of the other parts, you should at least listen to that part right after this or before this to kind of inform you to how we are approaching the actual topic and the actual subject. Now, with this one, the second part, it's going to be something that it was a longer conversation that we had in this last recording, and there were some issues with the network and the connection, so I decided to stop and then kind of restart this actual part, which is going to be about an hour and a half, as well as that first part, similar to the first part. Trying to get this out, so this one went a lot better. In that first part of this conclusion, I had to go in and post edit and post production and add a lot of voiceovers to explain what I was saying in different parts. It was pretty bad. But I hope you enjoy this. I'm going to read you the chapter list so you can get to know what the other chapters were that you can check out. As I said, there's an individual one for each of these chapters, and then we're going to lead right into this actual final part. Thank you. So here we go. Number 1 was Neither Gremlins Nor Poltergeist. Number 2 was What the Academics Really Want. Number 3 was Why Most Academic Advertising is Immoral Bullshit. Number 4 was On Reading Entrails and Student Evaluations. Number 5 was Grades, Communication Breakdown. Number 6 was When Moral Language is a Cover for Self-Interest. Number 7 was The General Education Hustle. Number 8 was Why Universities Produce Too Many PhDs. Number 9 was Cheaters Everywhere. Number 10 was 3 Big Myths About What's Plaguing Higher Education. And number 11 was Answering the Taxpayers. So before getting into it right now, just keep in mind that we're approaching this with a situation where we think the people involved in this, like, are in most other things. Pretty much most people want to do good. So people in here have good intentions. Most of them, we're approaching it with that assumption that most people have good intentions, whether it's the students, whether it's the teachers, the administrators, the businesses, everyone involved in the schooling system, even when it comes to the government and the state and all those things. They have good intentions. So if you have good intentions, is the system really the best way to actually achieve the good intentions that you want? Are there better ways to do certain things? Why are we doing the things that we're doing the way they are? Should other countries compare and say, okay, we want to be like the United States of America, so we're going to start copying what they're doing there? What can we learn from other people doing other things? What does the future of education in the United States of America look like? Because the schooling system is kind of the experiment. People were learning, people were getting educated before the schooling system existed as it does today, before the so-called cathedral was there. But now, when that is actually there, what is the actual situation? How is that going to change? What has it actually affected? What are the actual results for this thing? So that's it. Getting into it. Thank you for listening. Okay, so we're back in. Steven's going to finish giving us this conclusion. Apologies for this. We shall be improving this, and as I've mentioned in the previous series and in this one, we're going to get into human action next, and for that one, I'll hopefully have the system to be more streamlined, looking into some things. But yeah, Stephen, go ahead.
Sure. So this other evidence about the model-headed beliefs from the highly educated comes from the Hidden Tribes report in 2018. That was the study that broke down political groups based on demographics. They found that progressive activists, quote unquote, are wealthiest and most educated subgroup in America, overwhelmingly white. Over half of them have college degrees. 73% of them are politically engaged, as opposed to the average person, which they said is only 35%. And for that reason, they have an outsized role in political debates. That's what we always talk about, how the far left activists only make up 8 to 10% of the population, but because they're vocal compared to a lot of people, it seems like there are a lot more of them than there really are. Such people are also obsessed with what they perceive to be racism, sexism, other identity-based discrimination. And they said 69% of them say that they're ashamed to be Americans, in contrast with 24% of the population who feels that way. Now, here's another study that's interesting. They said you might think people who regularly read the news are more informed about their political opponents, but in fact, the opposite is true. They found that the more news people consume, the larger their perception gap was. People who read the news, who say they read the news most of the time, were nearly 3 times more distorted in their perceptions than those who read the news only now and then. And this was from the More in Common project, which I mentioned previously, and it kind of reminds me of Dave Smith was on a Tim Pool show last night, and they were talking about this, how the lockdowns have also exacerbated a lot of this polarization, because before it was, okay, you read certain media sources, but then you go to the store, you run into friends, you realize, hey, my opponents are all not crazy people looking to destroy me, so that sort of mitigates that. But if you stay in your home all the time and just read certain news sources, you go insane. And that's happened to quite a number of people. Again, from my perspective, that's more anecdotal, but I've seen it happen with a number of people I know where they're mostly inside, they just read news, they get crazier and crazier with the polarization, because it's that feedback loop of they go to sources that confirm their bias, they want to keep going back to it, it stirs them up, they go back to it, it stirs them up, and it just keeps going on and on. So eventually they think, oh, all our opponents are evil white supremacists who want to install the next Hitler, and they actually believe that in their own minds. And then the next section, they talk about the opinions of these infotainment industry, where how much they were adopted by readers, viewers, listeners, and followers. So, of course, we've talked in previous discussions about how many black people are actually killed by police, or unarmed black people are killed by police. As of 2019, it was 14. There are people who, if you ask, they think it was hundreds or thousands. Again, it was 14. It was 25 unarmed white people. By contrast, 20 people, presumably unarmed, were killed by a lightning strike in 2019. So if you average black and white unarmed people killed by police, you're about as likely to be killed by police as you are struck by lightning. So again, what are the odds? But one of the points the person doing the study is making is that there are people with college degrees who actually believe it's hundreds or thousands just because these sources say so, and they don't actually do their own research, which is a combination of the ideological bubble, but also people not doing their own research and questioning things that don't add up. That was that status that I wrote the other day about how my friend and I observed that if you question mainstream narratives, they automatically assume you're evil or you have some ulterior motive, when for us it's no, just things don't add up and we question them, because if you know how to think for yourself, that's what you do. And it doesn't mean that I have some super ability, neither does my friend, neither do you, but it's just the reality of, if you see things that don't add up, you should question them. That's just all we're saying. But the fact that the narrative has to be tightly controlled, and with the internet it can't be, the mask is off, as Michael Malice is fond of saying. Any thoughts or comments before I continue?
Yeah, for me, that's one of the few things that makes me heartened, that makes me still think, moving back to the United States of America might still be a positive thing, despite some of the the things that people are saying, oh, some threats to ending the United States of America is ending. Because one of the key things for me is that access to information, as I've been saying, that access to education, access to learning, that's still there. Yes, just because Twitter itself is preventing millions of people to hear other points of views and has their preferred points of view, it doesn't mean Twitter itself is preventing you personally from having that conversation with somebody right next to you. They're not coming in. It's not yet at the point where they're like, okay, we're going to take away your thoughts. Yes, even if they still deplatform you. Yes, even if you lose your job from that. I understand that. But the idea is that you care about. The ideas that you think came about through years, decades, millennia of humanity, those ideas didn't come from not talking about them. Those ideas didn't come from not hearing about them. Those ideas, people literally died trying to formulate those ideas, and people came to those ideas to prevent more people from dying. So keep that in mind. And yes, there are issues. Yes, there are limitations. But despite that, you might have to send your kid to school. It doesn't mean my kid has to go to this K through 12 or will be fined, or might be thrown in jail. There's people being thrown in jail for these things. My kid has to sit in this Zoom course. My kid has to go to a university if they want to get this job in this place that we think is good for them. That's all well and good. But who is stopping you from having these conversations with your kid yourself? Who is stopping you from thinking about the best ways to communicate with your children about this? Ask them about the environment. counter message those things. These are things that I think you can still do, and I think are still positive. That be heartened with that. Like there's still ways. People like Stephen and I are still having these conversations, even if we're not allowed to do it on Skype, even if we're allowed not to post these. We'll find a place to have it. We'll call each
Yeah.
other. We'll talk on some different
Yeah.
apps. Some of us might invent something new. So that's what I'm kind of thinking about. That information is still there, and I think the fact that we're realizing more and more and more how the current systems to that supposedly ostensibly were to provide us the things that we want don't do that anymore. That's what precedes us actually developing systems that are better to do those things. That doesn't mean sharing thoughts, doesn't mean individuality, doesn't mean agency that is going away because certain people don't like what your thoughts are, what your agency is, what you share. That's still there. It's just now we need to find ways around that. Yeah.
Well, I would also recommend too. I've been listening to and reading from a man named Terence Keeley. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a biochemist by trade. He worked for the Cato Institute. I forget what he does now, but he really sort of opened my eyes to all the corruption of science, especially through government funding. And he gets into a lot of the history of things. For example, how the person who figured out that the continents were connected actually destroyed their career. Of course, we actually know about Galileo and the Pope, how he was basically threatened and placed under house arrest. There was the whole thing about smoking, how all the people who found that smoking was bad for you, they were afraid to come out and speak about it because all the people who did smoke were going to push back and they didn't want to be ostracized by all these people and everything. And the point he's really making is that certain paradigms develop, people become invested in them, and then it's hard to overturn them. But it's that whole thing of enough people push back, then eventually that becomes the new mainstream. And then it becomes accepted. Then you have everyone walking around saying, oh, yeah, clearly this is true. We've known it all along. When it's like, no, you lost sight of the fact that it was a big struggle to get these ideas adopted. And these people had to overturn existing paradigms. And then likely someone else will come along and try to overturn that one. But again, that's how science progresses. So when you have all these people saying, oh, why would people believe this? This is stupid. This goes against what science has established. No, I mean that's happened every single time there's been some sort of breakthrough, but that's why terms like settled science are a contradiction in terms, because things change all the time, things keep evolving, and that's why we need to be open to this stuff, because skepticism of existing science is how science progresses ultimately. This is a whole conversation in of itself. I don't want to derail too much, but I see this sort of framework applying to academia as well. Oh, these people are educated, they have degrees, they know what they're talking about, go along with them. Oh, but they silence any dissent. It's, well, knowledge is not going to progress by silencing dissent. It progresses by people challenging them, coming up with something better. Then those other people come up with something better, challenge those people, and on and on. That's how knowledge progresses. Thoughts or comments on that?
Yeah, I don't know if this guy, he might have been on Power Hour with Alex Epstein. It seems like something, I don't know if I'd heard about some of the corruption in there by
Yeah.
listening to Alex Epstein's show,
Hmm.
talking about academia things. So he could have been on there. Could have been like on Molyneux or something. Okay, so with these things again, just reiterating that point
Hmm.
that yeah, there's ways through these. We're going to be able to find ways around this. Uh, Again, the whole idea with this focusing on the schooling system here, focusing on the Ivory Tower, is people have an idea. A lot of people from that K through 12 indoctrination, 90% of Americans haven't been through that. Growing up for a generation, thinking in the 60s it was something like 50%, 60%. Let me see if I still have that figure up. Yeah, in the 60s, 1960, 42%. Hey, I guess they're talking about this gender gap.
Hmm.
In 1960, it was actually 42% female, and then 39.5% male had completed high school degrees, and it's been mostly going back and forth between men and women. But since the year 2000, where there was parity, or 2000, 2001,
Hmm.
99, since there was parity, it's been more women than men. But that's in the 90s. That's when it hit over 90. Now you have that many people. So for generations, most of the discourse seems to think that this schools are the be all end all, but they're not. Advancements in human flourishing and human history and thought have been occurring before the institutions of schools and occur after. And yes, the United States of America has the world's share right now, a massive share of actual innovation and advancement. But that's due to the free sharing of ideas that exists in the United States of America, I think, with the freedom of speech and things like that, more so than the actual educational systems, more so than the schools. because you actually even see people come from abroad, come from other countries. Like right now, Elon Musk is the richest man, and again, this shows the white supremacist, sexist, like this is post-colonial theory. And bring that back. Shows how white supremacist that United States of America is. That the only way an African can be the richest man in the world in the United States of America is by being white. Like that's horrible. Like we need to have a conversation about that. Actually, we did have a conversation about that in the critical theory series that we had. But trying to finish up the thought, you have that kind of situation where people from other countries with other more limited ways of communication, things are more taboo, thoughts going outside of the diversity of thought is not as encouraged in other places as in the United States of America still when it comes to the interpersonal relationships. And that's why you still see a lot of people coming from other countries immigrating to the United States of America and being successful there. That's why you see a lot of innovation and things like that. And that still exists. That existed before the schools. That exists now despite the current schooling system. And that will exist more in the future after the cathedral finally crumbles to these cracks that are in these ivory towers. Yeah.
Well, Terence Keeley even writes about this as well, that historically the US and UK the governments barely spend any money on science. It was some for military spending. That was it. France and Germany poured a ton of money into science, but who led the Industrial Revolution? It started in Scotland and rural England. Look how many patents came pouring out of the US. Again, up until maybe like mid 20th century, the government barely touched science at all. It was just the military stuff. So it shows you, okay, you free the market, you let people keep more of their own money, science progress will occur. People have incentives to do these things. People have incentives to build better education systems. They have incentives to build more efficient machines, all that. You don't need a central authority to do it for everyone. Because again, and he made some other points too about how if you look at the standard of living also in England and the US versus France and Germany, it was still higher as a percentage of GDP as well. So they thought, oh, we'll pour all this money into science. France and Germany will lead the world in industry and scientific research, but it didn't happen.
Yeah, and this again, this is the same thing we're talking about with the universities. I think it was chapter something. Which one was it? Is it general education hospital? No, it was grades communication breakdown.
Yeah.
What exactly are grades grading?
Yeah.
What do people actually think a degree actually says this is someone good? And I take this further to politics. I say, what do people think it means being selected? The political system, the voting system, what does that select for? Does it select for honest, hardworking people, or does it select for conniving liars that know what people want to say? Like, there's no the term elite, what does it select for? So when you have this idea that we need more elites in power, because they're trying to equate the term elite just the same way they're equating rocket science course to graphic design that I took, when those are not the same. Oh, we're talking the same institution. They're not the same thing. Like, get out of here. Like, those two things are not the same things. So you kind of equate those things together, and then people take that further. And what do they think is actually being? What do they think? What do they grade the American educational system, the American societal system to? You look at this current pandemic. Yes, a few other people have developed vaccines, but they keep talking about we need a better healthcare system, like the rest of the rest of the world. America is the only the country that doesn't have universal healthcare and things like this. Healthcare for all. Our system is garbage. Where did all these other systems? How do these other systems come about developing their vaccines for this pandemic? Where are they? I don't see them. When you talk about innovation, oh, we need education for all. Look at all these other countries. Kids go to school for free. Where are the inventions? Where are the Elon Musks from those countries? Where is the SpaceX of that country? Where is the Facebook coming from that country? Where are these advancements coming from that supposedly superior system where everybody gets to go for free, where everybody gets free healthcare? Where are those systems? So what are they comparing it to? What is the actual results? When it comes down to it, America is still kind of better at a lot of other things. Will it always be? Probably not. But has it always been? No, America is relatively new when it comes to these things.
Yeah.
But in the future, it's not going to not be as successful because America becomes more like the countries that aren't as successful as America is now. But it'll be more that the world finally gets this globalization type of thing in and adopts more of that freedom of information, that sharing of thought, that kind of ideology, that kind of understanding and value for knowledge, and valuing that as the importance that it is, and using the best of, like, I think the most valuable resource that we have is humans. So using the best of that human resource and letting it be as much as it can be. So yeah.
So speaking of elites, you're going to like this next point, I think. So the UConn scientist and cultural evolution researcher named Peter Turchin has dubbed what he calls elite overproduction. This is the phenomenon that occurs when a society manufactures many individuals who would appear to have some claim to elite status, such as by virtue of their educational credentials, without there being enough actual elite job slots to go around to satisfy all their inflated self-concepts. In such circumstances, Turchin argues history repeatedly shows that these individuals become troublemaking malcontents. They begin to comprise a, quote, counter elite that lays groundwork for revolution by fomenting against their own society, its ruling class, and the legitimacy of its governing principles, e.g., against the very notion of American meritocracy. Revolutions in this empirically driven concept are not made by Marx's romanticized and misrated proletarians having reached their breaking point, but rather aspiring status seekers and would-be intellectuals stymied by structural roadblocks that would prevent their advancement through acceptable conventional routes. Consistent with Turchin's thesis, terrorism, the ultimate outlet for malcontents, is also normally not driven by ignorance or poverty, but a rather, quote, a lack of adequate employment opportunities for educated individuals. So, and I thought about this a lot because we always talk about how a lot of the socialist leaders, they're not workers who got together and wanted to overthrow the system. It's usually upper middle class people, very well educated. And this is usually what happens is you have people from upper middle class wealthy backgrounds. They feel entitled because they have credentials next to their names. They feel they're not getting what they deserve. They become resentful of the system. Enough of them get together, they try to overthrow the system. And that goes to the earlier point about Antifa mostly being upper class white kids, because on the surface of it, people see that and they think, oh, rich white kids in America, they're the most privileged people who've ever lived. What are they complaining about? But his thesis is that, no, you have to look at the fact that they go through these schools, they're told they're special, all these things are going to be waiting for them, they're going to get a great job, all that. They get out into the real world, and as we've been discussing, they realize that's not the case. What happens? They become bitter, angry, and they want to tear down the system. So once you factor in this piece of the puzzle, it all makes sense. And again, the socialist revolutionaries, I always point out, Marx, son of a lawyer, Engels, son of a wealthy factory owner, Lenin, upper middle class, Mao, son of a wealthy farmer, Pol Pot, son of a wealthy farmer. This is usually the case. It's not some worker rallies his buddies together and they lead a revolt. That doesn't happen. It's always these upper class people who do this. But when you look at it from this perspective, it pretty much makes sense why. So, thoughts or comments on this?
Yeah. I mean, not so much. Besides, like, I could definitely see why James Lindsay gets so much ire from a lot of people on the left by writing things like that, because he's really cutting it into a way where you normally see these kind of erudite kind of. I won't say it's like a polemic, but it's this these rather precise like distillations of what apparently is happening on one side of the board. You normally see this coming from like places like the Atlantic or like Slate, these kind of places where they put on these grand pieces, cutting down how inane MAGA is, how garbage this is. And one of the things, I really have a few articles that I've taken, and I've done this before on my channel, where I take some of those articles and I just switch the terms around. Like I did one focusing, for example, on, they're talking about why women over a certain age shouldn't settle and they should do better and expect more from men. And I just switched it around and put it towards men and things like that. I've seen some where you just going to switch. I'm going to switch out the right and make America great again, patriots and that kind of thing, and then switch it to the opposite aspect of it, talking about this, and you'll see just how accurate it is. And I think that's kind of things like, oh, you're using our tools against us, James, how dare you? And maybe that's in part because, as he's mentioned himself, he was more political left, and he still kind of is center left, right? He's like center left classical liberal. That's what he kind of identifies as. But now he's considered this crazy alt-right like heathen person. People like warning him, watch out, James, watch out, you're gonna get purged, and he's like enjoying
it's the same thing with Tim Pool. Like, people are like, oh, Tim Pool is a right-wing grifter. I'm like, the guy was a Bernie supporter. He still wants socialized medicine. He's to the left on me on pretty much most economic things. It's just, if you're not in that bubble, you're right-wing by default. So that's what it is.
Yeah.
So Now just to sort of finish up this article, like I say, this article is very long, but I thought it was very well done. I tried to summarize it because I didn't want to just read the whole thing verbatim, but I highly recommend everyone reads it. We can link it or something. So what about education for its own sake? And then this guy says, I'm far from being one of those Philistine conservatives who values only which can be monetized. I have issues with that. I'm sure in the next section on human action, we're going to talk about that, about profit and cost and everything. But so this was one of the few points I sort of disagreed with. But then he says contemporary universities are little more than social clubs and credentialing degree mills where kids get to stave off the responsibilities of adulthood for 4 years while insulating themselves, unless they happen to be conservative, from true challenges and discomforts in learning. Repeatedly, the Pat PBS children's moral that everyone except perhaps white heterosexual males is great exactly as they are. To say this another way, the bottom line problem is that when we made this mistake of trying to open higher education everyone, we opened the campus gates to people who neither had any interest in learning, quote, the best which has been thought and said, nor, quote, the ability to breathe that rarefied air. We then found ourselves in the position of facing and acceding to strident calls of elitism, racism, and other isms, and began to dumb down our education to meet people where they were. So I think we both agree with that. That's stuff we've been talking about for a while. And again, I think this article is important because I especially complain about the bias in academia, but this does have bigger implications. It's not just, oh, there's more people who disagree with me. This does stymie critical thinking. This does stymie the development of knowledge. This does cause people to isolate and go mental. This does prevent unity in this country. Again, we can debate if we've ever really been unified, but we haven't been this polarized in a while, and things like this only exacerbate it. So I do think these are conversations worth having, whatever your political affiliation are.
Yeah, and it's also just it's time.
Yeah.
Time is a thing, and we'll of course in human action we'll talk about this. When people focus on the monetization of things, everything is monetized in a sense. Like maybe people think they want this free education, free healthcare, like in the sense that Facebook and Twitter are free to use,
Yeah.
but they think, oh, we're not paying something, but because they don't consider time to be some sort of payment, but that kind of is sharing of information is
Yep.
profitable and things like this. But somebody is monetizing it.
Yeah.
Like, for sure, somebody is monetizing it. You might not have to pay to actually use the platform, but somebody is hosting the servers. Somebody's monetizing your content. Somebody's being paid. Somebody's paying to advertise to get access to you. So there is actual monetization. A lot of people run businesses on it, so they do monetize that platform. Those people helping to run those businesses on there are the people who are carrying that monetary cost that's coming in, that financial cost to maintain the actual system. Facebook is ran as a company, and Twitter is a company ran that's employed by people. How do you think they're actually paying people's salaries? How do you think Zuckerberg and Dorsey aren't millionaires if nothing is being monetized? Drop that whole fake idea of free. But the pernicious aspect of the free here is, do they want it to be free in the sense so they can also control and choose who goes there?
Yeah.
Because most of these people say we want free healthcare, we want free education, but everybody should be allowed to in. There shouldn't be any admissions. But then now you say, oh well, these platforms are booting people off. Well, it's a free platform. It's a private company. It's a free service. So you're not paying to use it. So they should be allowed to choose who uses it. So would they be okay with free university, free healthcare, but let the people have those stringent directions and organizations and decision-making process on who can have access to that free thing? Because technically that's what the free market is. Technically, if you are in a situation, you can decide, by this person being my wife, if they come to my store, they don't have to pay for that product, yet everybody else has to pay for that product. Any company in the free market can decide to give their actual service for free and find other ways, service to the customer, to the main person actually interacting using that service. They can give that service for free and choose other ways to monetize it. You can have a value for value system, which like No Agenda show is the show I listen to, that is a system I'm going to start adopting. And I'll say here, like if you want to give donations or anything, it's links below, things like that. This is a situation where people watch the content for free, and then if they feel they have value, they donate the amount that they feel like there's actually value. And I think Stefan Molyneux was using this as well too to run his free domain radio system. So that system is, and I think that's what we're going forward to in the future. There'll be more of that, where a university, like seriously, human beings in general are good. You see certain universities have these large endowments, have these parents send their kids back because they had a good experience. No parent is like, I had a crap experience at this university. I didn't learn anything. I graduated and I don't have any actual employment. So I'm going to be a legacy and send my kid back to that garbage environment. That's not how it happens. It's people who become very wealthy and they connect their wealth to having been at that university and they feel my child should have access to that, and then they send their kid back. They invest back into that thing. So they could be a future where I can see where people give information out there. Schools have these things, and then those schools, those institutions are funded by happy customers, by the people who are very glad that they had
Yeah.
that service. You can have a system where there's ongoing education, where somebody comes to a university, they get their initial degree in graphic design, and it's really excellent. They learned it in the content is there. They say to get the degree, you don't have to be in here for 4 years. You don't have to take general studies. Just learn the main stuff. Here you go. Just learn the main stuff from us. You go out into the workplace. That person goes out and is like, hey, I'm making a lot of money. They give back some. They say, wow, that
Yeah.
was great. And then that school says, whenever you want to come back for some little update, come back. If you want to come back and teach the new students something, come back for a bit. It helps you advertise, helps you get your stuff out there. You're part of this community. Build communities that way. There's going to be a future with that. And that's like post this. And and that's what, like I'm not against communities. I'm definitely not against profit. Everything is profitable, but as you mentioned, we'll get into that more in the human action thing. So yeah.
Well, just a few points to add on to what you said. There are two things that really stand out to me. Well, people complain about things being for profit. Again, well, even you going to the university itself is profitable. You want to develop skills and learn things and get a credential that's going to allow you to make more money to pay off the money you borrowed back and earn more for yourself down the line. So don't give me this
Yeah,
complaint about profit because you yourself are doing that. And
that's the
then,
primary objection. Yeah,
yeah,
the primary
it
objection that people have is I'm not earning enough money after it. So don't give me
yeah.
that. Don't monetize it.
Yeah.
You're trying to monetize your education.
Yeah, I mean, you're not there to hang out and then lose money. You're there ideally to get more than you put into it. That's what profit is. Yeah. And then the other thing too, I thought at your point in our last video about when they talk about education for everyone. Well, again, what is that education for everyone? We already have K through 12 for everyone, but do you mean university education? Then university where? Is it Keene State? Is it Harvard? Is it Marist here? Is it SUNY New Paltz? Which is it? And then the question is, what should they get and why? Because it's like, I think I keep thinking back to that article. Well, Gates and Zuckerberg went to Harvard. Okay, are you arguing that everyone should get a Harvard degree? What happens to the value of a degree if everyone has one? And how much do they have to lower the standards? A Harvard degree is meaningless, and then it's a wash, and then it becomes, well, you need more advanced school to stand out. Okay, is everyone entitled to that? This whole thing just becomes, I'm trying to think. It's like a downward spiral. It's no matter you keep going down this path, it just gets worse and worse, and it's going to implode or just have to reform. And then the last point one of my friends makes a lot is there's that famous Marxist line about each according to his ability to each according to his need. He goes, ask them this simple question: what happens when each according to his need out exceeds from each according to his ability? What if the ability of all doesn't exceed the ability to provide each according to his need? And that gets into sort of the last point about, okay, what happens when we can't afford a master's or PhD for everyone? What happens when everyone can't get top-notch healthcare? What happens when you say, oh, healthcare should be a right? Well, again, are you talking every operation? Are you talking doctor's visits? You add up all these things for everyone. We clearly couldn't afford that. So then you have to break it down and say what's important and why. And that's where I think a lot of these people haven't thought this through. Usually when I question this, I either get, oh, countries do such and such, or, oh, you just want poor people to die. Those are not arguments. Sorry, you have to come up with something better.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, those are statements, and I've gotten to the point in my older years of my interactions with in social media and just with people in general. There was a time when I was younger where I was just more open with just banter, just batting around statements and saying, okay, here's a statement, here's what I said, and how like this is what I think. Oh, you think that too? Okay, good. Or if you don't agree, you don't say anything. I'm at the point where I'd rather have if I'm going to engage someone in a conversation, there's very few times I'm choosing to actually engage in a conversation with somebody where I would not be completely open with them stopping the conversation so we can make a complete understanding on like the first sentence said. Let's say I just talk about something and then it's like 5 minutes of me introducing a topic, and then the first sentence was, in this situation there are certain power structures that prevent us from doing this. And then they want to spend 20 more minutes before we get into the rest of the things, understanding what I mean by power structure, by power, if I give examples, what I mean by us, like prevent. I'm willing to do that. But I realize there's a lot of people who are not. There's a lot of people who
Yeah.
just want to kind of just talk some surface level type of things and things. And that's the way most of the world has been. But I'm glad to meet people like you and know that there's enough people out there. It's not many, but I don't think um, as we mentioned, I don't think you find people with some of the disagreeable things that are going on that are able to back it up with evidence that are going
Yeah.
to in depth. It's mostly they heard something that sounded good and then they
Yeah.
took it for granted that where they heard it from was a valid source and then are repeating it. And to me that's positive because when people are actually willing to actually engage in conversation, I find it to be very productive, even if it's just finding out the parts of the conversation that they're not willing to talk about. Because there also are some similarities that you see in some through lines where it's like, okay, so this part, this is where you object, and you'll see that different people object to different parts of it in different ways. It's an interesting thing, yeah. All
Well,
right.
and the thing is too, when I'll challenge people on some of these points, I always hear things like, "Well, a lot of people are like that, or that's human nature." And I was like, first off, a lot of people are doing it. That's a logical fallacy. Argument from popularity, argumentum ad populum, and okay, even if you're not subscribing to the laws of logic, think about anything that was popular at one point. It's likely not popular now. Lots of people are saying this is not proof that something's right, and these things change all the time. And then my thing is, I don't like to say be better because that's what these annoying SJW types say, but I would say just have the integrity to look at what you believe and why. Say, okay, are you just following a trend, or have you heard this argument? Have you heard the counter arguments? Have you heard the objections? Like with my conversation with my friend about, can this be falsified? Are you simply finding holes in it? Can and should this be questioned? Are there better arguments? At least ask those questions. You don't have to just blindly follow a narrative because a lot of people are doing it. That's my issue, I think.
On the better thing, there's that one meme from I made a GIF of it. I'm not going to remember to post it, probably not. But it's the thing from Thor Ragnarok where he's talking to Thor is talking to Bruce Banner, and he says something, and then Thor's like is it like is he
Oh yeah,
like
that one. Yeah.
better as this like people like it's like is he though so I thought about that with the whole like better thing where it's like I look at something, it's like my feelings, like they're better than that, and then
Yeah.
then reality is like, are they though? And that goes to the politics thing. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
That's what I've been thinking about politicians. That's what I've been thinking about myself. I was like, oh, I'm better than that in the past. The
Yeah.
politicians are better than that. That's why they should do better than this. The teachers are actually better. Like, are they though? It's like, no,
Yeah.
they're human. They're
Yeah.
just people. And that whole be better thing, I think it's antagonistic the way it's said, but there's
Yeah.
some truth in it. I still the reason I think that is it's objectively better in my understanding, and I'm willing to debate about that topic. Whoever's willing to have a conversation, that's one thing I think I'm always open conversation. Anyone who wants to have a conversation about whether it's better to be nice and than correct. Like, would you prefer to be known as your friends if people are introducing you? Oh, that's Steven. He's very nice. He's always nice. He always tries to be nice. Or oh, that's Steven. He's always right. He tries to be right about everything all the time. I would prefer the latter, but I think
Yeah.
in general it might be more practical to actually just be the nice kind of things. But objectively, I think it's better to be true, to know what the truth is. So I think wouldn't you want to know better? Instead of be better, know what's better. And if you are wrong, if you take your time where you say, okay, I'm not going to actually find evidence for this, you might dedicate yourself and invest yourself into something that is still in general better than not doing that thing.
Yeah.
But by believing this is true without any evidence, there's a wide range of things that might be better than doing that thing that you're missing out on. So wouldn't it be better to be doing the thing that's actually better than what you think you're doing? And that's the kind of situation that the appeal that I make to people and what I've seen from my own life was this current systems, current structures, the current places where I've seen, yes, there's some benefit in doing it this way, but would it be better if I was doing it in line with
Yeah.
what reality is? And I think that's a better situation.
That's why I like that study above about the agreeableness correlating with the lack of academic rigor and the emphasis on feelings, because this is more anecdotal, but a lot of the lefty SJW types that I know, they're like that. They're the type of people who follow the trend. They want to be seen as the good people doing the right thing at that time. It's not, like I said, I used to say that they're not about principle. No, their principle is fitting in, being liked, getting approval. And
Yeah.
and look, I mean, I didn't have many friends growing up. I'm perfectly sympathetic to not fitting in, but the problem with this is that you lose your sense of self because it just becomes conformity to the group. And then when any of this stuff gets questioned or scrutinized by people like us, it all falls apart. And then everything is just following that group. And then the more you go down that path, the more you have to stay invested in that group and not dissent from them and go along with them, because without them, what do you have? Whereas I think with you, me, my friends, Abram, Edward, all that, because we're principled individualists, we can disagree with each other, but respect it. And at the same time, we learn from each other, and we're not worried, oh no, if I say this, he's never going to talk to me again. Like
Yeah.
there may be certain things that cross the line, but in general, we're not going to say them if there are. Whereas I think with these people, they put fitting in with that group at the top most priority. And again, I am sympathetic to wanting to fit in, but you lose your sense of self, and you don't have any other principles besides that if that's what you do. That's my issue. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just it goes, and I understand this is, I think this is a bit of a privilege. That's something
Yeah.
I think I can also argue in favor of and make the case for, that honesty itself is a privilege. It's a privilege to put accuracy and facts and truth above everything else. And I just recently read this book called The Perfectionist. It was a really excellent book talking about the different definitions and different points of accuracy that you have to do different things. Like he started from just you're in, and he's talking about the industrial revolution and the development of technology in that way, due to perfection, and talking about how the first inventions, like the steam engine, the amount of distance it used to have to in order to actually have a steam a turbine that works with like the piston
Yeah.
going up and down, the distance of accuracy of that, the precision you had to have there is compared to like the precision that you needed to have like at the end he was getting to things like satellites that are telescopes that are in the sky. Like one of the earliest telescopes to go out and supposedly look at this moon was just broken. Like it just
Wow.
like it was due to like some minuscule like 0.000000001% level of actual precision that just messed up the entire like million
Wow.
dollar. So that is that. I think that is a privilege, and for most people, they don't really. I think they might not realize how they actually have access and they have leeway to actually get that. We fit into these groups that we've talked about with these friends, but we know why we're fitting in. So we understand. Oh, if we do this behavior, we understand this group is this way. We're here for the same reason. So it's harder of a threat to think, oh, they're just going to boot me out for doing this other unexpected thing. But most people are in groups that they haven't defined. People
No.
should at least define, why are you a member of this group? Try to understand, are these people here for the same reason that I'm here for?
Yeah.
Am I associating these people? You don't have to agree with my reasons. I might completely disagree with your reasons, like churches and things like that. I disagree
Right.
with the premise, but it's a group of people who come together and in general share a book and they discuss and they say, we understand this, we're here for this. There could be external things related to it, but at least when they're at church, they're talking about church. And that's why some people have objections. When it's school, we're supposed to be there to actually learn about biology, learn about the stars. I don't want people injecting all these other things in there and messing up and saying my our ability to teach this thing that we've agreed to actually come here to learn and discuss is requires us to understand all these other external issues that have nothing to do with that. And then those are the kind of things that bring up these things. So groups aren't bad. Feeling to belong isn't bad. I didn't feel I belonged in the groups that were undefined, that didn't
Mm.
actually go for those kind of things. And I'm glad, like with the internet and with these abilities, I've been able to push through and understand why I believe the things that I believe. And that makes me better to find other people that I can fit in with by
Yeah.
understanding why they believe what they believe. That's that it'll get you to a better situation. You build a better echo chamber for yourself. At the least, if you want to remain in an echo chamber, at least be able to convince yourself. At least be able to provide yourself evidence for your beliefs, and that will be a better thing.
That could be a T-shirt or something. Build a better echo chamber or something.
Yeah, so we'll break that down. I will actually do that.
All right, so the next book I want to touch on is The End of School by Zachary Slayback. So Slayback was one of the co-founders of Praxis. He's the former business director. He also wrote the introduction to the underground history of American education by John Taylor Gatto. He wrote the most recent introduction. I'm not sure what Slayback does now for work. I have him on social media, but he doesn't put a lot of his information. So again, I'm not sure what he does for work. Very, very, very intelligent young man. Went to Penn State, actually dropped out, but helped start Praxis and went off on his own. Touch younger than me, very like McGill, very smart for his age. So this book focuses on both issues with lower and higher education as far as schooling versus education in general. I liked he quotes Peter Thiel's line about how one of the greatest mistakes we make is that in modern day society is we mistake process for substance. So the way he likes to put it is that education is substance, schooling is a process. So people see it as a lot of people see it like, oh, I went to school, I'm educated, now I work. Whereas no, education is something you should be looking to attain your entire life. Schooling may be something you go through to get some of it, but it's something you should keep working on your entire life. And of course, one of the biggest lies as we tell children is that you have to go to school to learn, and that learning is work. And he explains that this is why so many kids, they'll learn things to pass tests and they have no interest. And like me, one of the things that resonated was he learned history, mathematical skills, and things like that playing video games, because as a child that seems relevant to you. You may not play that game 20, 30 years down the line, but you learn how to do it in a way that, hey, this does have some practical merit to me, and then you end up using it. Whereas if it's here, go to school, memorize a bunch of things you'll never use again, then it sort of closes a lot of kids' minds to future learning, because they just think, oh, they associate that with being boring. And they talk a bit, he talks a bit about the different types of school. There's Montessori schools. There's also Sudbury schools, which I guess are a little more free spirited. I'm not as familiar with those, but it's a similar format. He talks about the arguments against homeschooling and why they're weak. The usual people should be socialized, but then it's like, okay, well, we have Boy Scouts, town sports leagues, all these other things. Yeah, it's a bogus argument. One point this really resonated with me is he talked about how schools don't save kids from abuse. In fact, it's often worse in school. Like I used to know somebody who would say things like, oh, public school is the reason this person I knew they were getting raped by their uncle. And to be clear, I do understand there are people from abusive households who go to school, but I would make the case there's a lot of the opposite. I mean, I've experienced it. I know two people have. I know two people who were sexually assaulted in school. One by a teacher, she ended up leaving. Another, I'm not sure if it was by staff or administration or what, but he ended up as well. So, and these are people, nice, normal people who come from happy households. So people say, oh, they go to school to escape these. No, a lot of times it's the opposite. And then the study here found that 1 in 4 students will be bullied. More than 1 in 4 will be a bully, and at least 3 in 4 will report witnessing bullied. And some may even be keeping quiet, so it may in fact be 4 out of 4. So yes, there are some cases of kids from dysfunctional households escaping, but again, what is it? 1 out of a few hundred, 1 out of 1,000. There's plenty of the opposite. Again, both in studies and in my observation. What do you think on that?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
if that's the case, if you say that, how many of these students are discovered, these people who supposedly the abuse that the student goes through, how much of that is discovered while actually learning any of the academic material? So even if the case was that getting kids outside of their home into an environment with other concerned adults and seeing them interact with kids is a positive thing. No, I'm just saying that yes, if somebody found out to be abused, it's not like the kid came to school, had his bruises on himself, had his awkward way of behaving, and then finally, when he was asked the question about chemistry, he said some kind of thing. He put the answer on the chemistry test with some letters to make the name of the some chemical thing of I am being abused, and the teacher figured it out like, oh, those elements say I am being abused, let me save this kid. It wasn't through that process.
No.
That was picked up because the kid was behaving in a strange way, was disheveled, was not bathing, there's different things that the people picked up on. He said something to a friend, and then the friend told a teacher, and then the teacher ended up. That whole process is there, and you can still do that. You can even better do that by having actual communal areas where you can have adults from the community come together with kids from different ages and working in different ways and interacting with the kids directly, having the conversations with the kids. And you'll still be able to find who in that community is not doing it. In fact, it might be easier because if you just say this is a place where parents willingly come and let their kids talk to other adults and talk to other kids and talk openly, the kids who actually are being abused, the parents who know they're abusing their kids, will not want to bring their kids to that environment.
Yeah.
That could be one way to already tell. How come you don't bring your kid to like the communal gatherings? Like we have these kind of things where it's completely optional, but we'd like to see you. Those are the kind of ways you can still find these things. So the absurdities that go with these things, and then we mentioned this in before in other places. You might be an excellent, peaceful parenter, directly with your kid, working well. The school itself might be okay. Most of the people in your school could be okay. But then one parent is not doing that, and you're putting your kid in a situation where that kid could flip out, come in, gun down the school, and kill your kid. Just like randomly like that. There's that kind of thing in there as well. So this whole idea of like, yes, you might be completely okay. It might help other people, but you might also be putting other people's kids in danger. When it comes down to it, it's just we just need to have an understanding that we living in certain societies in certain places where people want to the businesses want to offload the training of kids, of training of employees to other people. The parents want to offload, or the people entering certain institutions want to offload the actual searching for jobs. And unfortunately, some people want to offload the actual responsibility of parenting onto other people. And that's where you see this kind of situation happening. And also some people understand that we need to have a select group of people trained into the system that enforces and gives us power, and we're going to hopefully do this by, just like the Prussian system was made to train soldiers, the current systems that we have are made to train citizens in a current system that is self-perpetuating, like any organism exists, whether it's biological directly or social organism. So this is the place that we're here, unfortunately.
Well, I was also thinking too, I forget if it's in this book or somewhere else I read it, that Montessori and Sudbury schools actually have lower rates of bullying. And they said that part of that is because kids of different ages interact. So there's cases of kids protecting other kids, but there's also kids seek out people they want to be friends with. Because there's this idea, which I'm about to get into, that you're supposed to only be with people your age, all from this zip code, and those are who your friends are supposed to be. And again, that's very arbitrary. Whereas, like I say, I mean, a lot of my friends are older than me. I mean, you, Abram, some people from high school, all that. Again, that's just how I've always been. So do I have to associate with people my own age? I have some younger friends too, but do I have to associate with them? No, it's very arbitrary. And this next section here, it's called "Your High School Friendships Have Died Out. Rejoice." And I thought that resonated with me a lot, because he basically makes the point that, think about how your high school friendships are. It's just people from your area. So it's the only reason you go to school with these people is they're your same age and it's the same zip code. So it's, you're supposed to be friends with these people, quote unquote, but ultimately these are friendships out of convenience and out of necessity. It's, you may happen to meet people that you have some connections with. Like I was thinking, my dad has two people he's been friends with since he was a child. My father turned 70 this year, for those who don't know. So he's been friends with them about 60 years. So you may meet people like that you stay in touch with long term. But again, that's more by accident rather than by design. Like, you happen to go to school with kids you have things in common with. Yeah, they'll be your lifelong friends, and that's good. But again, if you do, it's by accident. And I mean, my class, I've always talked about them talking about sports all the time. What did I have in common with them? And I used to take that as a reflection of, something's wrong with me. But no, it's, you have one school, small school, I talk to a handful of people. Do I really have to fit in with that handful of people? And somehow that's a reflection of everything I am? No, I don't see that. I think that's a bogus argument. And he makes the point also in terms of the value of networking. He and the other Praxis guys have talked about horizontal versus vertical networking. And what they mean by that is people your own age at about the same point in your same career, but also people at higher levels. Because you think about it, and that's one thing that Praxis is really good on, is they don't want you to be some ant in a mill somewhere, basically just working with the other drones. They want you to cross paths with higher ups. They want you to meet the CEO and the president of the company. Those people can mentor you, open doors. And then in turn, when you rise, you can also mentor people below. You start your own business, you can hire them. So he makes the point, if you're just clinging to this network from high school or later college, yes, you may meet valuable people, that the PayPal people met in college, for example. So there are cases of this happening, but in general, people place way too much importance on these friendships, which again are usually superficial and more out of convenience and necessity, not true connection. All right, what are your thoughts and comments on that?
Yeah, just for people who claim to be progressive, this is more evidence that just shows how much of a lie that is.
Yeah.
that they cling on to this system that just look at the realities that existed in the world when certain schooling systems were developed. Yet they still claim that the world is so different, has changed so much. We need so much change. We need to progress. We need the new things. Don't be traditional. Don't be conservative. Yet when it comes to their cathedral, they want that to be untouched. They just want
Yeah.
more of the same. And yet the realities, at once upon a time, this was developed that actually was superior, was better than the previous system with the realities that existed at that time. But those realities no longer exist. So let's find some. Let's actually progress from where we were and just help the case of human flourishing. And this current system, from my judgment, it hasn't changed. He might say I was biased coming into this, but from this 11-part conversation, 12-part conversation with the conclusion here, the research I've done so far, again, as we mentioned, feel free. We'd appreciate it if you go back in, find some cogent actual parts and want to actually engage in conversation about certain topics instead of just flinging things at us. We'll be willing to go in and see what are you actually addressing in there that you consider wrong. Some of the stuff we might not be able to answer.
Yeah.
Like, we don't know these people, we don't know the actual
No.
authors, but hey, maybe it might be a way find these authors. These authors are available. Maybe there's some things in the book that you think we got wrong, that you think some of these people are accessible. You don't need to go to a library. You don't need to
No.
hear a story from your grandma. It's a great thing that we live about this time is you can actually go online and interact with these people and actually get the information almost as close as possible with some of these people. It's a great time to be alive. Yeah.
All right, so about 2 more points or so in this book. So the one thing, Slayback was the first one who taught me about there never being a golden era of higher education. I've touched on it in the previous videos. I'm just going to restate it here. Basically, people have this idea that there was some golden era where people went to school and became learned, then went out to become successful entrepreneurs and leaders. And the point here is that if you look into the history of education, well, higher education, starting with the University of Bologna, founded in 1088, these were places for the clergy. That's why you see Harvard Divinity School, things like that. For some people, they did get career-related things, obviously, teachers, academics, and doctors, for example. But again, as I've touched on a few times, colleges were basically finishing schools or summer camps for the rich. I sent you that video from Titanic recently about how why Cal was actually the good guy, and
What a
well,
harlot.
there's an interesting actually deleted scene on there where they show them in the exercise room and he's using the rowing machine and he says, reminds me of my Harvard days. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is they mentioned earlier on in the movie that his father was a successful Pittsburgh steel tycoon, and this is essentially how it worked with higher education, that your father is a successful tycoon, he sends you to Harvard because that's where you befriend other sons and daughters of rich people, possibly meet a lady, network, all that, and then you come back to your father's business, take it over, and then run it till you retire or die. That's how it was. And then that's a fictional example, but if you want some real life examples, well, John Rockefeller Sr., his only education was a 10-week business course after high school. That's it. His son got into Princeton, ended up going to Brown. That's John Jr. Andrew Carnegie did night classes. I don't think he even had much elementary school. His daughter went to a private all-girls school. Who was it? Henry Ford, I think, dropped out either high school or elementary school. Again, I'm sure his kids went to top schools. But again, that's how it was. And it was the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy where they see all their kids in these nice schools and they think, oh, they're getting this best education. If I send my kids there, they'll be like them. Well, no, they had all those connections, the networking, all that. And then I'm going to send my kid here for status reasons and on paper to get a good education. But does it actually help them run their family's business better? It's not clear that it does. And I think, again, as we're talking, as college becomes overpriced and all these other issues, it may start to go back to that because people are going to say, yeah, if you have the luxury of sending your kids to get mentored by the greats on why they should read Homer and learn Latin and Greek, yeah, okay, maybe some people will do that, but is it practical for the majority? I would say definitely not. So, thoughts and comments on that?
Yeah. There's the golden era thing.
Mm.
People will transition that and say, like, there was a time when colleges were better, and that's what we need to get back to, and that's a thing. Yet that will also coincide with the robber baron time, where some of the people will say colleges were better, people were more deserving in the past. We'll also inversely complain about robber barons and say those people were undeserving at that time because there was less equality. Yet they argue that those people went to colleges that were better, and actually, so
Yeah.
there's,
Yeah.
there's a dichotomy there. And then with the whole school being the places, as we mentioned, what was the actual purpose of the schools? So let's put aside the educational part, as we've seen. There's actual parts, better ways to actually learn the things. But now when it comes to the social aspect of universities, that definitely was it. It definitely was a part of that, where
Yeah.
someone would be like, okay, you're going to come here. First of all, it was more like, you know, you're going to have this employment. There was lots of more situations where I think businesses would send people to specific schools to learn specific things that were already going to be used. This is going to make you a better employee in the job you already have. So it's a
Yeah.
lot easier to get some specific actual value added to what you're learning, rather than I need to learn these random things and gamble and guess that hopefully somebody outside after will find me valuable. Because you're not just hiring somebody to do an automaton, you're hiring a person that fits into your work environment and things like that. So that could be something to move back to. Get to a situation where people are more prepared after 12 years of school. It's ridiculous that 90% of people come out and you still need 4 more years. That's a
Yeah.
garbage situation. That means it's a
Yeah.
failure. But get to a situation where people can test out and then, okay, now that you're an intern, now that you learn this, go to this university and learn more of the specifics, learn more of the theory, and then come back to us and you'll be able to apply that. But lastly, the key thing is colleges were built for that. Colleges were built for people to go, meet the missus, get the missus degree, as women used to say, and then some women used to say in society, or you meet your husband, you meet your wife. That socialization aspect, even if they say schools were good for socialization, in which they were,
Mm.
are they really that way anymore? Are they really helping socialization? Or are kids being get to a situation where they're being desocialized, where they're
Yeah.
more antagonistic to meeting people? How many people actually go through college anymore? I think now you find in the past, people who actually went to college would find that person to marry rather quick in there. This might be a thing. There might be studies on this to see what was the average in the '60s or the people graduating. And then of course outside there's also people getting married. But now you see there's a higher chance for people who I think who have been in college
Mm.
to not get married
Yeah.
or to get married very late. Like, who were they meeting? Were they actually socializing in college? Were they in a situation where they can actually socialize with people worthwhile enough to think I can actually marry and be with this person? So that one part that was key in the way the institutions were actually developed is gone.
Yeah.
How many of those people are in those situations, like the businesses where it's like we're just finishing school and then we'll come back and be employed by our family? Very few people who actually go to college have parents and have people in situations where they already have the connections that would be able to employ and put them in the places of employment
Yeah.
already with whatever they learned. Because that's how it was before. You might
Yeah.
not directly work for your parent, but your parent has some connections, and
Yeah.
he knows that my friend runs a wood mill somewhere, and then if you go and learn accounting, I might not have use for you, but this person has for use for you.
Yeah.
So that pipeline was in there as well. So even the universities themselves never ever developed that whole aspect wing of the university of job placement. That was never something
No.
that was part of the development of universities, and now people are demanding that from universities when it was never part of its DNA. Now we're just trying to add these things. So yeah, that's just a thought that yeah, I think we're expecting too much of that system
Yeah.
than what that system actually is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what you just hit on a point that sort of resonated with me. You talked about desocializing. I mean, people who I went to high school with, I was very shy. Like, I did not fit in. I was a bit of a misanthrope for a time. But again, it's because I was forced into this small school with people that I had nothing in common with. And I took that as me having low self-worth. But then I got out into the world, sort of found myself, found a good network of people, yourself included. So what I'm wondering is how many other people went through this similarly? How many other people are being robbed of their true potential? They could be in a place where there's more people that they actually have things in common and are productive. For example, our friend Rose was telling me about she had a better time in high school, but she went to a big school. And like me, she's someone who doesn't fit neatly in any category. But the advantage she had is that she could hang out with people who talked about sports. She hung out with people who were into philosophy. She hung out with people that were into heavy metal music. I mean, people who were in art. So she could sort of play to each of her interests. And I would have liked something like that a little more because then you can find people that match your interests. You don't have to be super close with any of them, but enough where something sort of resonates and then you can develop yourself accordingly. Whereas here's a small group of people, well, you just have to like them, they have to like you. Of course that creates resentment and dysfunction. It's being forced, it's artificial.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's something I can relate to as well. I was
Yeah.
floating around through different cliques in my whole time in high school, even in college. Really, I was just
Yeah.
had some people who were like in the art department who just never really hung out with anyone in the football. And all I had was three players who were on my football team at the time, three or four. Then yeah, Justin joined later. So yeah, there was some players. So there was some crossover, and the school was relatively small, but still, that was definitely there. That whole ability to go to different cliques, and now that can be done with the internet. You can have a situation where even if people meet in one arbitrarily decided area to learn the actual information part of it, the socialization part and the interest can still be found if you let people have access to different chat rooms, different groups, different meetups and things like this that are organized outside of the school rather than just having them be in that one location where everything has to be there. Because as you mentioned, some people will happen to be in a location that the school that services that location is 5,000 kids, and that will be their high school experience, and that will be a much different experience than somebody who, in these situations with this redistricting, with the way borders work, literally somebody across the road who
Yeah.
you see on a daily basis could be going to a school with 500 people.
Yeah.
And what experiences is that person going through? So
Yeah.
you two might be friends before school or elementary school when you share the same elementary school, but then high school, middle school comes, high school comes, and you start being sent to different places. And literally, that one kid living right next to you, who you've grown up with, who you've had lots of similarity with, becomes a whole different being because you're allowed to nurture all these other experiences. But because of some states deciding we're going to have this area and redistrict because we like the voting patterns of this group and gerrymandering. I don't know if it's tied into gerrymandering and things like that, but there's
I don't
various
know.
reasons, school boards and all these things. It's a labyrinthine system to actually decide these things. Um, that person making that decision, all of a sudden, this friendship you have with this person just completely changes. Whereas if you had a situation where, sure, you're going to the 5,000 people place to learn the English, this person is going to this 500 place to learn the English. But when you have the social groups, it's more like it's just a team. You know, you select teams like when you go to the playground, you pick your
Yeah.
team. You can say, okay, this school has a football team, this team doesn't have enough players.
Yeah.
Why should we limit it? Let's just have a tryout for every parent that's able to bring their kids to this location at this time. Then you have all those people come. Then maybe your friend who might go to this other school for English, when it comes to football, he's on the team with you.
Yeah.
You're able to play. You're able to
Yeah.
actually. So there's so many different ways. Just small, even minor tweaks that could just blow the system. Like it just increase the functionality of the system. That it's this. It's an absurdity to see how much is left on the table and it's not even discussed. Yeah.
Well, I always like my good friend Matt Murphy's story. He wouldn't mind me telling this because he brags about it all the time in person. But how we went to the same school and like we both didn't really fit in. But he and this other guy knew a lot of people in other schools and were basically they went to clubs a lot. They liked a lot of the girls liked them. They were friends with the bartenders, all that. And we laugh in retrospect now because there was a story about him and this other guy named Matt would go to the clubs and people we went to school with would come there and see them and be like kind of surprised because it's like they see them as people who didn't fit in, but then elsewhere they actually had friends, and then they would try to be buddy with them, and there's like, well, f you, you wouldn't talk to me in school, now you want to be my friend. So there was that kind of funny dynamic, and then with me, with some of my friends from the vocational school I went to for cooking, it was a similar thing. Like the restaurant I went to last night, one of my friends from back then is chef there. So there's things like that where, okay, these are people I have actual connections with versus these are people I just have to go to school with based on arbitrary reasons. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's the thing. We can build back. We can build
Yeah.
back better connections. Those are things that we don't. And that's part of why the pernicious thing. That build back better. That great reset. Those are really. They. It's good marketing. At
Yeah.
least like some of these terms, some of these things like be better, like researching. That whole idea is not bad. Building things back better is not a bad idea.
No.
But one of my major questions is with the education system, with other things in general, with yourself. If you get an injury and you go to rehab and you're building yourself back to a stronger self, why go back to doing things the way you were doing them before
Yeah.
if those things needed to be reset and done better? We all understand. I think most of us understand now we have a chance to restart the education system. When it comes to politics and things, we say, yes, we have a chance to restart certain global systems that we all benefit from. And we probably can, most of us will probably agree, are in general net positives to the human condition. But why should we trust the same people who are in charge of and running the old system to somehow be better at creating this new system, this better system on the future that you think is going to happen? That's one of the questions that I kind of answer. Like, try to ask yourself: Are you the same person? Are you approaching this issue from the same mindset? Are there different ways you can do? Are there different things you can consider? Are there different tools that you can use in order to actually be better? Don't just go back to working out the same way that you worked out before you you cut your Achilles, like split, and
Yeah.
then you rebuilt a better Achilles. Try to find a better way to do that. Maybe find a different personal trainer, get some different shoes, do some different workout instead of high intensity training. Like there's different
Yeah.
ways of adjustments that we do, but when it comes to this schooling, when it comes to societal things, it's like, yeah, we'll just get good old Uncle Joe back in there, and you'll just get things better.
Well, I like
So,
Dave Smith's point last night too about people complaining about big tech, and then there's this whole thing about, oh, government should regulate them when it's like they're already heavily entwined with the government. And then Smith said some people said, well, the government should run them according to the rules of the Constitution. He's like, oh yeah, because the government has done such a good job of following the Constitution as it is. It's like, what what are you doing here?
and I think that is, as you said, that's one thing. I think it's part of our enjoyment of having this series is
Yeah.
this shows the space. Like, yes, we at least are seeing what the issues are. We're seeing the
Yeah.
problems, and we're talking about the different solutions, and that's on other aspects. That whole thing, from the personal, and that's the thing. Whenever you talk about a group, whenever you talk about institutions, you can't have a collective without individuals.
Yeah.
So the things that happen with individuals, it's the same way, like as an individual, that whole, it's known by most people, like the first step of actually recovering from something is recognizing you have an issue. So when you accurately recognize that, you can talk about that, you can focus it on more, you can discuss it, you can think about it. That's normally the first step to actually being able to address that issue. And this is the same thing that's why I'm happy about the world and what's going on. We're noticing it might not be Illuminati, it might not be lizard people, it might not be the emails or all these things. Donald Trump might not be literally Hitler.
Yeah.
But by Trump coming out, it made a lot of people realize that whatever the system is going on, I don't like it. I don't like that system. What's
No.
happening? So more people are interested in what's going on. With the schools shutting down and this mixed match of teachers protesting, saying we're going to protest against the opening of the schools, and then the parents being like, no, we need the school, the kids need to go back to school, like our lives are living. So you see parents just thought, as long as the schools are open, we can just outsource this to them, and then they're going to do that for us, and then that's okay, and then they enjoy having our kids, and our lives will keep going. Then that's crumbled, and then now parents are like, wait, we thought they wanted our kids there, but they just want to get our kids' minds. Like, now that my kid is at home, okay, I agree. I won't send my kid to school. I agree with your argument. Like, you're an individual, you can decide you don't want the teachers to be in danger. So now that my kid's here, I am in possession of my kid. Let me decide where my kid gets his education from. Just like when I put you in possession of my kid, I let you decide where they get. They're like, no, you're not allowed to bring your kid here. You still have to babysit your kid. But we're deciding what they learn. We're still deciding what goes in their head. Then people are like, wait, what? Wait a second.
Yeah.
I thought we had choice in what goes into their head, and you were just telling them while you look after them. Now people are realizing that that really wasn't what that's about. This whole idea of the teachers, like Alan Clark says, teachers, we're like people protected group. When you have like that woman, a rep from Chicago who's one of the most active teachers unions in the country. I think in Wisconsin they had a situation where they occupied the Wisconsin state legislature for, I think, a week, just protesting against things. So you have that people like the teachers have it so bad. It's so bad for the teachers. And then she's in Puerto Rico, like, look at me tweeting from the it got really cheap. Then she's like, oh, anybody who wants to come at me with this thing. So showing those things, this whole idea that the teachers are just some like magnanimous group of just well-doers who just really love the children's, that's being shown that no, they're just people employed in a job.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean they're bad, but I just want people to be brought down from these ubermensch kind of ideas of these gods and goddesses and saints and saints is saint. There's no a saint and a saint woman. Anything. It's just a gender neutral term. So you have that kind of situation where it's good now that people are seeing things for what they are, and now that society sees what the education system is, sees what the political systems are, see what the interpersonal relationships are, then we can be like, okay, now that we're restarting some of these things, now that we're getting back in these things, what's a better way to go about these things? And I think it's a positive thing.
Sure. All right, so just a few points to wrap up Zach's book. So you touched on this earlier, but they talk about successful dropouts, but this is a little more complicated because they always hold up how many successful people have college degrees, but there also are successful dropouts. And I'd point out there are also successful dropouts that aren't as well known. For example, these guys, obviously Slayback, McGill, but also I have a friend who dropped out of a few colleges, founded a company with a few people. It's a software company. As far as I know, he's a millionaire now. We have a relative in our family did a similar thing. He's very well off too. So it sort of gets murkier here because there are people who drop out and are successful and we just don't hear about them. And there also are a lot of people with degrees who we never hear about again either. So this has to be sort of looked into on a case by case basis. And Slayback is clear. He says, if I talk about dropping out, I'm not saying become someone who just moves in with your parents, stays at home, eats Cheetos, watches TV. No, if you should have some other sort of plan in place. And one of the things he's saying that a lot of professors are saying that's interesting is that there are a lot of kids in college who don't belong there. Not, I mean, there are kids who don't take it seriously, don't really want to be there, but there also are a lot of kids who just want to go out and build things, and they see it as, oh, I'm learning all this stuff I'll never use. This isn't practical. I just want to go out and build things, work for a company or something. So that's the other side of the equation as well. And then his ultimate point is that you just have to build a better signal. And he was saying how if a person starts like a small company or an online store or something, he goes, that says more to me than someone who went to school for like marketing, coasted their way through, did the bare minimum, and just they have it on paper, but versus someone who actually took the initiative to create things and stand out in some way. And he said even in some cases, if they're young and even if their idea fails, okay, at least they're trying and they're putting themselves out there. That says a lot more to me than just, okay, they went through the motions and got the piece of paper. So it ultimately comes down to build a better signal, and it sounds like that's what Crash is looking to address. So
Yeah.
that's all I have for Zach's book. Anything else, or?
Yeah, no, it just goes back again to what we've discussed several times, and this is what is success? What is that measuring?
Yeah.
Is in general, it's financial success. If you have ability to own, even if you're not owning a home, you're okay. Maybe you've got 6 months of your future where you know if you weren't employed for 6 months, you have enough of the savings. You have a core group of friends that care for you. You're comfortable. You're not like depressed. Like you might be struggling. You might be challenged. But what do people define as success? You know,
Yeah.
some people seem to define success as only the Zuckerbergs, only the top 1%. Then that's why there is that focus for some people, focusing on the top 1%.
Mm.
But in many cases, there's 50% of people who you just never hear about, who just go about their day-to-day lives that feel there are successes. And I think that's part of why maybe you see in this summer of protest, where for some people there was a lack of able to relate to just the regular people in their day-to-day lives who you see these stories of people. And I think there's also a thing like Dave Portnoy coming up with Barstool Sports fund for small businesses. He's doing something like that, and you see these stories of these people who literally just wake up every day and then they go out and they just work every day, and they're working on close margins. But as long as the business is open, they're sure they can do that for 20 years, and that gives them comfort. That gives them that sense of success. Somebody recently posted something about the price of tuna dropping, like the what's it, tuna? Yeah, I think it was the tuna in Japan. Like they normally have this end of year market or start of year market where they normally have the cost and the biggest catch, and it really crashed. But then I was recalling watching these small documentaries on YouTube about like the top omakase places, the top like sushi places, and you look at the actual chefs, and they have these small little hole in the wall stores. You know, it's like Michelin 2-star, but it's like literally the size of my room, where someone just
Yeah.
comes in, there's like maybe like 2 tables and a counter, and it's just the chef himself and like maybe two other people working in
Yeah.
them. But this guy is the top sushi chef in the world. But when
Yeah.
people think that's a success, right?
Yeah.
But his day-to-day life is waking up every day at 5 in the morning, going to the market, picking the fish like one by one. Like the fishermen who are giving him the fish, they're successful, and they do that every day. He goes and he preps it for the first like 10 hours, gets the thing open, serves like 20 people that day, gets his money, finishes up, cleans, goes to sleep, repeat. And he does that every day, and that's success.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily, this person might not be driving a Bentley, he
No.
might not even ever get to that point, but he's successful. That is successful to that person. So when people say success, they need to like understand what are you defining as success. But for most people, for some people, unfortunately, it's some kind of caricature of some situation where they just think successful people just sit back and do nothing.
Yeah.
They just kind of like chill.
Well, TK Coleman, he used to work for Praxis as well. He's at Fee now, I want to say. And he posted something a while back. I don't remember it all, but it was about Derek McGill's day. And he said how people think, oh, here's this young man who makes all this money. But he goes, look, he spends hours on the phones interviewing people. He writes his own blog. He does marketing work for another company. He does paperwork related to Praxis. So it's like, yeah, he's young and he makes money, but it's not like he just sits around all day. It's like, and then people think, oh, he's young, he's making money, I want to be like that. But it's, do you know what he's gone into, what he's done, and what he's put himself through to achieve that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the monetization. They think it's simply monetization rather than earning money, and
Yeah.
that's one of the lines from. It's one of the less, I think, said lines from. No, it might not be a less said line because it's in the famous Frederick Ancona money speech, which I still I've been trying to think of a way of doing some kind of animation for it or some kind of production of the presentation, a video kind of visual presentation. It's like a 19-minute speech, amazing speech. He says something about like he says a key thing about the United States of America was that they invented the term like and it was like making money. I'm trying to see the actual term that he actually used, the Ancona speak, but he was like the earning money, the process where it was the first culture that actually understood that it's not something that just comes, but it's that creation of money, that creation of wealth is something that takes actual agency, takes actual involvement. It's
Yeah.
not just something that's just there laying on the ground.
No.
So that was something that I think is lost on a lot of people who seem to have a negative relationship to that. I was actually having a conversation with somebody I was talking to you about. Was literally saying like talking about non-profitable professions. I was like, what is a non-profitable profession? What does it
Yeah.
even what does it even mean? So yeah, so people have that seem to have that idea in their mind. Yeah.
Yeah. Moving on, I'm not going to spend too much time on it because we've talked about it a lot and spend a lot of time here. But the other book we recommend is The Case Against Education by Brian Kaplan. That's been a source in this. He draws heavily on the work of Michael Spence, who's an economist who won a Nobel Prize for this, who he was basically the one who discovered that education, it's more about the credentials, it's more about signaling to employers. It's not about oh, this person knows all these things. It's more, this person is smart, this person is hardworking, this person will do what they're told and all that. And if they have a credential next to their name, that's what that signals. And he talks, Kaplan breaks it down a bit further, emphasizing things like, well, he goes, look, I love smart nonconformist people. I know some smart lazy people, but it comes down to what do employers want. And if you come across as someone who's smart but also will do what they're told and work hard, that's the complete package for employers. So that's what that's signaling. And that's where something like Praxis, if you don't have that, you have to find a way to signal that in some other way. And Kaplan's another like the book we've been reading where it's he doesn't give all the answers, but I think he asks a lot of the right questions, and he talks about could there be other ways for employers to identify this? Are there other ways to do it in a way that's cheaper and more cost effective, so smart, hardworking people can get in the workplace right away rather than spend years in school, memorize a tiny bit, never use it again. The whole thing is just so inefficient and costly as we've been discussing. There could definitely be better ways. So that's all I have. I think that's pretty much wrapping it up. Again, if we're wrong, the authors are wrong, anyone else is wrong, feel free to give us info. My thing is, after reading all these people, this book, all these things, I don't know how anyone can hear all this and still think everyone should go to school, especially the way it is. If there are arguments that go in the other direction, I'm happy to hear them, but nobody has convinced me as of yet, just anecdotes and talking points. Any thoughts or comments?
And that is that is a key that is a key thing that right now to get to this point with this amount of information out there, and I do understand there's reasons why I will have certain biases to certain information,
Yeah.
certain sources that are available to me that I won't go to. Like when I was drinking, there's certain sources that I would not read about drinking, about alcohol, because I understood like I was at some kind of precipice where if I might not be able to consider myself before when I was still dealing with the corporal punishment and a experience as a kid. I was still excusing that. So there were certain blocks in my mind where I was like, okay, I'm not going to go into certain information about peaceful parenting because that'll open up Pandora's box of questioning all these things and looking into it. So the information is there. I get that. But at this time, we at least have done an 11-part series, a 12-part series talking about this. There's a lot more information about it. Like the book we read, Other people are doing a lot better job of actually talking about this. Not even just that. As we've mentioned, it's actual figures. Just look, I want
Yeah.
my kid to learn this and be successful at this and work in this kind of way. Is school really the best way?
Yeah.
Are the student loans really the best way to do this? Are you really going to find this? This is the simple math. This is the information that's out there. There's people to calculate. There's stories. You can talk to people. So at this point, if you're still a student, if you're still a parent, and you're just putting your kid through this, and then your kid comes back and they're just like, "Ree," and all kinds of crazy,
Yeah.
it's kind of on you at this kind of point.
Yeah.
Like, you should actually get to the point and actually research this at that point and get that information and come to that decision, and then you reap what you saw. Like, um, sorry, okay, I found the quote, if you don't mind me reading this. And
No, go ahead.
there might be some kind of libertarian razor type of thing, like if two people with libertarian type leaning minds speak for like 3 hours, Ayn Rand will be brought up somehow. Maybe we've gotten to that point. So, okay, here we go. So this is the paragraph that contains a line. So, if you ask me to name the proudest distinction of Americans, I would choose, because it contains all the others, the fact that they were the people who created the phrase, to make money. No other language or nation had ever used these words before. Men had always thought of wealth as a static quantity to be seized, begged, inherited, shared, looted, or obtained as a favor. Americans were the first to understand that wealth has to be created. The words to make money hold the essence of human morality. And just by Schadenfreude or whatever, like whatever, this wasn't planned.
Schadenfreude.
Schadenfreude. It wasn't planned, but this whole thing was the whole idea of the cracks in the ivory tower, the moral mess of the moral mess of higher education, and here like like the morality. And as we're pushing towards debasing that institution, going towards free education, going towards that place where people just think it's a static quantity, it's just a degree, instead of understanding that education, information, knowledge, it's not just there. It's something that you accumulate. It's something that people study. It's something that people had the ability to share and go in and discuss and be able to talk about certain things, share certain ideas, and be wrong without being killed for being wrong. And many
Exactly.
places in the world still today, you're killed for saying the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Now they want to figuratively kill people for not saying the right thing. They want to figuratively deify people for just saying the right things, being in the right places, and that's not a good place to be.
No, it's not.
You have, as we mentioned, with people looking into the actual information, um, you have people who have. I can imagine. I see what some Kenyan parents go through just to get their kids to go through a level of college education that would just be not even imaginable to what Americans go through.
Yeah.
And the research they put in to find that. Yet Americans have the ability to get all this information, the libraries, all these things. Or even for me personally, when I was in college, I was like, wow, we have all this access to all these labs, all these other things. I can, like you say, you can sit into other classes that are not part of your majors in your free time. But no, I'm just going to get drink. I'm going to get wasted. I'm going to go online and post on Twitter about how I hate the president of my country and things like that. Instead of taking advantage of all these resources, instead of going and climbing that that wall. Remember we were joking around about
The rock climbing wall.
yeah, instead of going and using the rock climbing wall and getting
Yeah.
some kind of experience, we're going to sit there and just be like, I hate Donald Trump, man. I'm
Yeah.
glad it's bad. So there's those kind of things
Yeah.
that we can say. I think America itself has had certain things. It built these ivory towers, and those towers are cracking. And I think that's due in part to just the misuse and lack of actual information. And if those institutions do crumble, the institutions that those ivory towers were built to actually keep up, the ideas, the reason those things were built was education, was learning, was the improvement of human civilization. And if America keeps focusing on that and the rest of the world starts copying that system, it's not going to be good for us. We need to go
No.
back to that situation. We can earn this. We can go back to like the actual roots of these things. And
Yeah.
I guess that's kind of that's kind of where I'm at on this whole thing. So yeah.
Okay.
So that's it.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay, so we've been ramping up on these conversations, and thanks again, Stephen, and thanks for
Thank you.
anyone who's been listening to this. I've been posting clips of these on my channel, and as things are going, even just on principle in general, I will be looking into just as we talked about, the people in the colleges need to be looking at what they're saying and be better informed about what they're entering. So if something happens, they graduate and they don't have the ability to actually earn, they should know that ahead of time because the information is there. Just like right now, I am seeing what's happening with the current platforms. I know there's other platforms I can use, there's other things I can do. So if it comes to a day, depending on the certain topics me and Steven and other people want to engage in, we understand certain places are not going to be conducive to that.
Yeah.
They might just boot my channel off or things like that. So I'm creating different locations and that. And when wrapping up, first conversation was, I guess, we had You Are What You Consume that was more disjointed. It wasn't necessarily a series. It was different topics focused on a certain idea. And that has informed the rest of us of our conversation. We started with the 1619 project, which was a 3-part series. You can check that out. Then we went into critical theory, cynical theories. And that was about 7 or 8 parts. And this has been 12 parts. And next is going to be human action, which will be probably at least 20 parts. It's a massive tome. We've discussed the first parts of the series. The introduction, I think I'll at least just do a reading. Like, I am actually tempted to see about actually just doing like a reading and breaking down of it. Like, for some of you who might be familiar with some of the atheist community things online, like the Bible Reloaded, and they went on to the Quran Reloaded, where they actually just read the Bible word for word and gave commentary, and it took them 4 years or so.
Oh, wow.
Over like hundreds of shows. But I don't think I'll expand into that level. But the first introduction at least will be a reading of it word for word, and we'll kind of talk about it to set the basis of it, and we'll figure out the system of how we'll have that conversation between me and Steven from there. Anything else?
That's all I have.
Yeah, so that's it for us. Thank you again very much for listening. Like, share, subscribe. There'll be more content coming. I will be telling you about the different locations that we're doing this. Steven will also share any other things. I'm going to try to get Steven into a situation where he's part of this conversation platform that I want to start, where he can let you know what topics when you might be able to actually engage with us or other people that we'll try to bring in, some of the names that we've mentioned and people we've talked about. I think it's an exciting time to be alive despite the darkness that's happening that we might be focusing on. So yeah, that's it for me.
Sure.
Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.